My husband cheated with my best friend while I was pregnant, then 20 years later, my second husband stole my late husband's life insurance money to fund his affair with a coworker during my second pregnancy. I'm 45 with a newborn and starting over. About 20 years ago, while I was pregnant with our first child, my husband cheated on me with my best friend. I'll never forget the day I found out. The betrayal cut so deep, especially because I was carrying our child while he was sleeping with someone I trusted completely. It had been going on for months, right under my nose, in our own home, sometimes even while I was asleep in the next room or at my prenatal appointments. My friend had been in our wedding party, had helped plan our baby shower, and had even gone with me to doctor's appointments when my husband was too busy with work. When he finally admitted to it, only after I found explicit messages and videos on his phone, I completely lost it. David and I had been together since college. We met at a campus party during our sophomore year, and it was as close to love at first sight as I could imagine. He was studying business while I was pursuing a degree in English literature, dreaming of becoming a teacher. We dated for 3 years before getting married right after graduation. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple, the ambitious, charming business major and the thoughtful, nurturing future teacher. We had a beautiful wedding, bought our first small house in a nice suburb, and planned to start a family after we'd settled into our careers. I soon discovered that I was the one making most of the sacrifices. I turned down a prestigious teaching position at a private school to stay in our hometown because David's job was there. I used my entire inheritance from my grandmother to put the down payment on our house while he spent his bonus on a luxury car. It's important I make the right impression at work, he explained when I questioned the expense. When we decided to try for a baby, I was the one tracking my cycle, taking my temperature every morning, and scheduling intimacy around my ovulation. David complained about the lack of spontaneity, but still expected me to be in the mood whenever it was time. After 2 years of marriage, we decided it was time for children. I was ecstatic when I found out I was pregnant just 3 months later. David seemed excited too, helping me set up the nursery and attending the first few doctor's appointments. But around my 4th month of pregnancy, things began to change. He started working late, missing appointments, becoming distant. I chalked it up to nerves about becoming a father or stress at work. His company was going through a restructuring, and he told me he was worried about his position. In reality, he was spending those evenings with Jessica, my best friend since high school. She had been my rock through everything: college applications, wedding planning, and now my pregnancy. She was the first person I told when I found out I was expecting. The 2 people I trusted most in the world were betraying me during what should have been the happiest time of my life. The night I discovered the truth, I had been feeling particularly unwell. I was 7 months pregnant and had developed gestational diabetes, which made me constantly exhausted. David had said he was working late again, but I needed him to pick up my medication from the pharmacy. When I called his office and his assistant told me he'd left hours ago, a cold feeling washed over me. I called Jessica next, but she didn't answer. Something made me check his iPad, which was synced to his phone. The messages I found between them were explicit, detailed, and devastating. There were plans for their future together, complaints about me and my pregnancy, and worst of all, videos of them together in our home, in our bed. I felt physically ill reading David's messages about my pregnant body. "She's like a beached whale now," he wrote to Jessica. "I can barely look at her. You're so much sexier." In another message, he complained about having to pretend to be excited about the baby. "I'm not ready for this. If she wasn't so stubborn about keeping it, we could be together already." They had been planning a life together while I was planning our baby's nursery. Jessica had even gone with me to pick out paint colors for the baby's room the same week she was sleeping with my husband. In one particularly vicious exchange, they joked about naming the baby after her, saying it would be their little secret. They'd even got together in the nursery I had painstakingly decorated, with Jessica sitting in the rocking chair I had saved up for months to buy. When he came home around midnight, I was sitting in the dark living room, surrounded by printed screenshots of their conversations. His face drained of color when he saw me. I didn't scream or throw things like I wanted to. Instead, I spoke with an eerie calm that surprised even me. "I want you out of this house by tomorrow," I told him. "You will never see this child. You will pay every penny of child support the court orders, but you will not be a father to my baby." In those first few weeks after the confrontation, he tried to fix things. He said he wasn't looking for forgiveness, but that he was sorry and wanted to be part of our daughter's life. But I couldn't get past the betrayal. The thought of him holding our baby after what he'd done while I was carrying her, I just couldn't stomach it. So I stuck to my guns. I took the house, the car, everything I could get. He didn't even fight it with a lawyer, which honestly made it easier for me to push him away completely. Jessica tried to contact me too, desperate to explain her side of things. She sent letters, emails, even came to my door once, but I refused to see or speak to her. I found out through mutual friends that she and David had broken up shortly after I discovered their affair. Apparently, he blamed her for being careless and letting me find out. So not only had he betrayed me, but he hadn't even had the decency to stand by the woman he'd thrown away our marriage for. He moved back with his parents for a while. I heard they really let him have it, especially his mother, who had always treated me like a daughter. His father, who had been cheated on by his first wife, reportedly didn't speak to David for months, but that wasn't my concern anymore. After a few months, when our daughter Emily was born, he reached out again. He just wanted to see her, he said. Nothing more, but I still refused. I was determined that he would never be part of her life. Maybe it was vindictive, but at the time I believed I was protecting her from a man who couldn't even be faithful during one of the most vulnerable times in our marriage. What pushed pushed me over the edge was discovering that David had created a fake social media account to view photos of Emily that my mother posted. He had even approached several of my friends asking them to send him pictures of his daughter behind my back. A few did, betraying my trust just as Jessica had. When I confronted one of these so-called friends, she defended herself by saying, "He seems genuinely sorry, and he is her father." I cut every single one of these people out of my life. I changed my number, moved across town, and made all my social media accounts private. I even considered changing Emily's last name to mine, but the legal process was too expensive at the time. After that, he seemed to give up. He never missed a child support payment, but he stopped trying to see her. I heard he started dating again and eventually moved on with his life. Meanwhile, I focused on being the best single mother I could be. When Emily was 6 months old, I went back to teaching part-time at a local elementary school. My mother would watch Emily during my working hours. It was hard managing everything on my own, but there was a fierce pride in knowing that I was doing it, that we were surviving despite David's best efforts to destroy us. Some nights, after putting Emily to bed, I would sit on my porch with a glass of wine and allow myself to cry, to feel the full weight of my anger and heartbreak. But by morning, I was always ready to be strong again for my daughter. I did tell my daughter the whole story when she was older, about her biological father, how he cheated with my best friend when I was pregnant, but also how he had tried to be in her life during those early years and never missed a child support payment. What I didn't tell her was that my former friend had gotten pregnant during their affair and had given birth to my daughter's half-sister just 3 months after my own delivery. My former friend had initially tried to trap him into leaving me for her by getting pregnant deliberately. When that failed and he chose to try to save our marriage instead, she gave the baby up for adoption out of spite. I'd kept track of where this child had ended up through a private investigator. She was living just 2 hours away from us for years. Several times I almost ran into her at the mall or restaurants. Seeing this girl who looked so much like my daughter, it was uncanny. The family that adopted her had no idea about the connection to us. On my daughter's 16th birthday, her half-sister had somehow found photos of my daughter on social media and messaged her, not knowing they were related but commenting on how similar they looked. I intercepted the message and blocked the account, never telling my daughter how close she'd come to discovering her biological father's betrayal had created another child, another life that paralleled hers in such a twisted way. A couple of years after Emily was born, when the dust had finally settled from my divorce, I met Michael. He was a science teacher at my school, newly transferred from another district. Unlike David, who was all charm and charisma, Michael was quietly confident, kind, and thoughtful. He noticed me struggling to carry a stack of books to my car one afternoon and offered to help. That simple act of kindness led to coffee, which led to dinner, which led to the most genuine relationship I'd ever experienced. Michael was everything David wasn't: loyal, dependable, and he fell in love with Emily immediately. He would spend hours playing with her, reading to her, teaching her about the world with a patience I found extraordinary. When Emily was 3, Michael and I got married in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. Emily was the flower girl, though she mostly just ran around throwing petals at the guests rather than down the aisle. It was perfect. Just 1 week before our wedding, David suddenly reappeared, claiming he wanted to be part of Emily's life again. It had been nearly 3 years since his last attempt. I later found out he had just gone through a bad breakup and was using Emily as a way to appear more sympathetic to his ex. He threatened to take me to court for custody, saying he had documentation of my parental alienation. When I told him about my plans to have Michael adopt Emily, he became enraged, showing up at my workplace and causing a scene that nearly got me fired. He called my parents, crying and claiming I was stealing his daughter. The same daughter he had complained about in texts to his mistress. The same daughter he had made no real effort to see for 3 years. The same daughter whose birthday he had forgotten twice. Thankfully, when faced with actual legal proceedings and the cost of fighting an adoption, he backed down and signed the papers. Emily grew up to be an incredible person. She inherited her biological father's dark hair and blue eyes, and somehow his athletic ability too. She became an excellent swimmer and tennis player. But her character, her kindness, intelligence, and integrity, that was all Michael's influence. He was the one who attended every swim meet and tennis match, who helped with science projects, who taught her to ride a bike and drive a car. He was her real father in every way that mattered. Emily was always brilliant in school, taking advanced classes and joining every academic club possible. Michael encouraged her love of science, setting up experiments in our garage and taking her to museums and science centers on weekends. By the time she was in high school, she knew she wanted to become a doctor, specifically a pediatric oncologist. Her dedication was extraordinary for someone so young. Then, when Emily was 17, our world shattered again. Michael was diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. Despite catching it relatively early due to Michael's attention to his health, the prognosis was grim. We tried everything: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments, but the cancer was relentless. Throughout his illness, Michael remained focused on Emily, insisting on helping her with college applications from his hospital bed, discussing her future careers, making sure she knew how proud he was of her. 8 months after his diagnosis, just before Emily's high school graduation, Michael passed away. We were both devastated. He had been our rock, our protector, and suddenly he was gone. Emily wore his favorite tie clip on her graduation gown, and when she was announced as the salutatorian of her class, I could almost feel Michael's pride radiating through me. His parents, who had embraced Emily as their own granddaughter from the beginning, sat beside me at the ceremony, all of us crying and smiling simultaneously as she delivered her speech, dedicating it to the father who had taught her to love learning. After Michael's death, I threw myself into supporting Emily as she headed off to college. She'd been accepted to several prestigious universities and decided on one across the country with an excellent pre-med program. I was proud of her but terrified of being alone. For the first time in almost 2 decades, I didn't have a clear purpose beyond my part-time job at the local library. library, where I had started working after leaving teaching to care for Michael during his illness. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Around that time, I started thinking about Emily's biological father again. I wondered if she might want to know him, now that she was an adult. We were planning to buy her a car as a graduation gift, and though I could afford it with the life insurance money from Michael, I saw it as an opportunity. I reached out to David and asked if he wanted to contribute. It wasn't really about the money. It was about giving him a chance to connect with her before it was truly too late. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. We met for coffee, our first face-to-face conversation in nearly 18 years. He had aged well, silver streaking his dark hair, but his eyes were the same ones that had once charmed me in college. He was divorced now, he told me, his marriage having ended a few years earlier. He had 2 teenage sons from that marriage, both in high school. He showed me pictures. Both boys had his eyes just like Emily did. During our coffee, I learned that his wife had left him after discovering his affair with their son's 22-year-old teacher. History repeating itself. He tried to justify it, saying his marriage had been basically over anyway and that his wife didn't understand him. The same excuses he'd made about me to Jessica all those years ago. When I pointed this out, he became defensive, accusing me of living in the past. He then had the audacity to ask if I was seeing anyone, placing his hand over mine in what I assume he thought was a charming gesture. I pulled away immediately. "I'm still grieving my husband," I told him coldly, emphasizing the word husband. "Michael was twice the man you'll ever be." He flinched at that but recovered quickly, reaching for his wallet to show me more photos of his sons. He did contribute substantially to the car, but when I mentioned the possibility of meeting Emily, he seemed hesitant. He told me that I should feel free to tell her about him, and if she ever wanted to meet him, he'd be willing. But he didn't want to disrupt her life if she wasn't interested. I thought that was a pretty reasonable response, given everything. I showed Emily pictures of her biological father and told her what I knew about him and his family, including her half-brothers. She listened patiently, but she wasn't particularly interested in meeting him. "Dad was my real father," she told me, referring to Michael, and she was right. The car was a nice gesture, she said, but she didn't feel any connection to a man who had never been part of her life. It's been almost 3 years since that conversation. She knows about the car and appreciates the gesture, but she hasn't expressed any desire to meet David. From what I can tell, she sees this as ancient history that doesn't really affect her life. She had her father, the man who raised her, and that's enough for her, even though he's gone now. About a year after Emily left for college and 2 years after losing Michael, I decided I needed a change of scenery. With nothing holding me to our small Midwestern town anymore, I took a job teaching English in Europe. It was something I'd always dreamed of doing, and with Emily settled in college, it seemed like the perfect time to reinvent myself at 42. The school was an international academy in a charming coastal city in Spain. My Spanish was rusty at best, having only studied it in high school and college, but the school primarily taught in English to the children of expatriates and local families who wanted their children to become fluent English speakers. I found an apartment in the old part of the city with terracotta roof tiles and a small balcony overlooking a bustling plaza. For the first few months, I focused on settling in, learning my way around, improving my Spanish, and becoming comfortable in my new role as an English literature teacher to teenagers from around the world. 6 months into my new life, I met Jack, an American contractor working on military bases across Europe. We met at a cafe where I was grading papers on a Saturday afternoon. He asked if he could share my table since the place was crowded, and we ended up talking for hours. He was charming, adventurous, and made me feel alive again after years of grief. At 38, he was a few years younger than me, but the age difference never seemed to matter. He told me stories about growing up in California, joining the military after high school, and then transitioning to civilian contract work that kept him traveling around the world. In retrospect, the red flags were there from the beginning. On our 3rd date, Jack made a comment about how impressive it was that I owned my apartment outright, thanks to Michael's life insurance. On our 5th date, he forgot his wallet when we went to an expensive restaurant. After we became intimate, he left his toothbrush at my place without asking, then gradually moved more of his things in over the following weeks. Within 2 months, he was staying at my apartment whenever he was in town, never offering to contribute to groceries or utilities. "I'll pay you back when my contract pays out," he'd say, but somehow that moment never came, and I let it slide because I was so desperate not to be alone anymore. Our relationship quickly became serious, but it was complicated from the start. Jack's job required him to travel to various military installations across Europe and the Middle East, often for months at a time. For the first 2 years, we were mostly in a long-distance relationship. He worked in remote locations where we could only connect through terrible Skype connections. Those calls were the highlight of my day. Seeing his face made everything better. He would visit me every few months for just a week or two. I know he claimed he wanted to just quit and stay, but his contract made it impossible without significant financial penalties. We fought about things I can barely remember now, but despite it all, I never stopped loving him. There was something about him that made me feel young again, that made me believe in second chances after losing Michael so tragically. Emily was wary when I told her about Jack. She had only met him twice during her breaks from college and medical school, and she missed Michael terribly. "He seems nice, Mom," she said during one of our video calls, "but just be careful. You don't really know him that well yet." I assured her that I was being cautious, but in truth, I was already falling deeply in love with the idea of building a new life with Jack. We got married 2 years into our relationship, in a civil ceremony at the local municipal building with just a few of my colleagues as witnesses. Emily couldn't attend due to her medical school schedule, which I think was partly by choice. His contract with the military contractor ended, and he found a job with a security consulting firm in the city where I was teaching. I thought we were finally going to have the life we'd been fighting for. What I didn't tell Jack was that I had paid a substantial completion bonus to help him end his contract early, nearly $50,000 from the remains of Michael's life insurance that was supposed to be for Emily's medical school. I justified justified it to myself as an investment in our future together. Emily had scholarships and student loans. Surely she wouldn't miss the money that much. I was too embarrassed to tell her what I'd done, so I lied and said I'd used it to renovate my apartment, even going so far as to send her fake before and after photos I found online. The guilt ate at me, but I convinced myself it was worth it to secure my happiness with Jack. I even used part of Emily's inheritance from Michael to pay for our honeymoon to Greece, a trip Jack had insisted we deserved. We'll pay it back, he promised, once I'm settled in my new job. Another promise he never kept. But getting married didn't fix everything. I know I have my insecurities. I've always struggled with them, especially after David's betrayal and then being widowed so young. And Jack, he had his flaws too. When he drank too much, which was increasingly often, he became a different person, saying hurtful things that he would later claim not to remember. He could be charming one minute and coldly distant the next. I'll admit that I sometimes found his behavior embarrassing, especially at school functions where my colleagues would witness his inappropriate jokes or his tendency to dominate conversations. These incidents would lead to arguments back at home. He always acted like our problems were entirely my fault. If I expressed concern about his drinking, he would accuse me of being controlling. If I felt hurt by something he said, he would tell me I was too sensitive. I could sense that sometimes he thought about leaving, but he stayed, and I was grateful for that. I had already lost so much in my life. I couldn't bear the thought of another failed relationship. I was in my mid-40s and had been teaching while he supported our lifestyle beyond my modest teacher's salary. I loved my job, but I was also thinking about our future together. Then, remarkably, at 45, I discovered I was pregnant. It was unexpected and risky at my age, but after years of unsuccessfully trying to have a second child with Michael, it felt like a miracle. I was overjoyed, but I saw the fear in Jack's eyes when I showed him the positive test. I knew he was worried about becoming a father at 38, especially since he had always been ambivalent about having children. With my pregnancy hormones, I was more emotional than usual, and we seemed to fight more. Emily, who was in her second year of medical school by then, was shocked when I told her about the pregnancy. She tried to be supportive, calling more often to check on me and sending books about pregnancy after 40, but I could tell she was concerned. About my health, about the stability of my marriage, about this half-sibling who would be 20 years younger than her. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. I developed gestational diabetes again, along with high blood pressure that required regular monitoring. Jack tried to be supportive, accompanying me to doctor's appointments when he wasn't traveling for his new job, but there was a palpable tension between us. His drinking decreased once we learned about the baby, which gave me hope that fatherhood might be the turning point he needed. When I was about 8 months pregnant, I noticed changes in Jack. He seemed distant, constantly checking his phone, smiling at messages I wasn't privy to. He started working late more often, claiming his company was bidding on a major new contract. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just work stress or excitement about the baby. But deep down, I recognized the signs. I had seen them before with David. One night, unable to sleep due to back pain and anxiety, I went to the kitchen for some tea. Jack had left his laptop open on the dining table. A notification popped up from his email, and without really thinking about it, I clicked on it. What I found shattered my world. There were intimate emails between him and Sophia, a woman from his work. They shared everything, their deepest thoughts, their feelings for each other. They talked about me, about our marriage, about how they wished they could be together. I read how he resented me, how he saw all the things in her that he wished I was. "You're young and free," he wrote to her, "not tied down with baggage and expectations like her." The baggage I assumed was both my age and my pregnancy. As I scrolled through hundreds of emails dating back months, I discovered something even more devastating. They had been planning this all along. "Once the baby is born, she'll be too busy to notice if more money goes missing," Jack wrote to Sophia. "We can put it toward our place in Barcelona." In another email, he told Sophia that he had already transferred most of Michael's insurance money to an offshore account. "She thinks I used it to pay off my contract, but it's waiting for us, babe." They had detailed plans for their future together, using my money while I was carrying his child. There were even emails where they joked about how pregnancy brain made it easy to gaslight me. "I told her she agreed to pay the full down payment on the car last month and she totally believed me," Jack wrote, followed by laughing emojis. I had no memory of this agreement because it had never happened. He had manipulated me during one of my most vulnerable moments. Then I went into labor 2 weeks early. Despite everything I had discovered, I called Jack, who was supposedly at a late meeting. He arrived at the hospital an hour later, smelling faintly of perfume and alcohol. He was there with me in the delivery room, trying to be supportive, but I could see him checking his phone whenever he thought I wasn't looking. Despite that distraction, when our daughter Lily was born, I thought it was one of the happiest moments we'd shared. I was exhausted, but filled with love for our new family. Jack held Lily with tears in his eyes, and for a moment, I allowed myself to hope that her birth would change everything, that he would recommit to our family. The weeks after Lily's birth were hard. I was recovering physically, dealing with sleepless nights, and trying to adjust to life with a newborn at my age. Meanwhile, Jack seemed increasingly detached. He was physically present but mentally elsewhere. He would hold Lily and help with diaper changes when asked, but he never initiated care. He started staying out late again, claiming he needed guy time to decompress. I tried to reach out to him to suggest counseling, but he kept pulling away. 2 months after Lily's birth, I finally confronted him with what I knew about Sophia. I expected denial, apologies, promises to fix things. Instead, he seemed almost relieved that it was out in the open. He told me he wanted to leave. "I'm not cut out for this family life," he said, gesturing toward the bassinet where Lily was sleeping. "I thought I could do it, but I can't. I feel trapped." trapped. I was completely crushed. Here I was, still recovering from childbirth with a newborn at 45, living in a foreign country where my support system consisted of a few colleagues, and my husband was telling me he wanted out. I begged him to stay, to work things out, to think of our child. I reminded him of everything we'd been through together, all the obstacles we'd overcome, but he was resolute. He found an apartment and moved out the following week. 2 days later, I discovered he'd emptied our joint savings account. Nearly $30,000 that I'd been saving for years from my teaching salary, plus another $20,000 that was part of Michael's life insurance payout, meant for both Emily and Lily's future education. When I confronted him, he smugly told me it was compensation for having to pay child support. "You trapped me with this pregnancy," he said, ignoring the fact that we'd been actively trying to conceive. "Consider this my severance package." A couple of months later, we were divorced, and despite the judge ordering him to return the money, he claimed he'd already spent it all. I later found out through mutual friends' social media posts that he'd used it to take Sophia on a luxury vacation to the Maldives, staying at the exact resort I'd shown him when we were planning our own dream trip before the pregnancy. He even bought her a $15,000 engagement ring while they were there, posting photos with the caption, "When you find your real soulmate, no price is too high." They were literally lounging in an overwater bungalow that my money had paid for while I was struggling to buy diapers and formula, having to borrow money from Emily to make rent that month. My lawyer said we could pursue criminal charges for the theft, but without money to pay legal fees up front, I had no way to fight him in court. The real knife twist came when I discovered that Jack had emptied Lily's college fund just 3 days before moving out. This was money that friends and colleagues had generously contributed to at my baby shower, plus what little I had managed to save during my pregnancy. He claimed he deserved this money because he would be paying child support for 18 years. When I pointed out that the fund contained gifts specifically for Lily from other people, he shrugged and said, "They gave it at our shower, not just for her." Even worse, he had taken the irreplaceable memory box I had created for Lily, containing her ultrasound photos, hospital bracelet, and a lock of hair from her first haircut. When I begged for these sentimental items back, he told me they had been accidentally thrown away during his move. I later saw Sophia wearing a necklace that looked suspiciously like the gold locket with Lily's birthstone that had been in that memory box, a gift from Emily to her baby sister. It's been 6 months since Jack left. I wish I could say I've moved on, but the pain is still raw. He sees Lily twice a week for a few hours at a time, though he's already missed several visits because of work emergencies that somehow coincided with Sophia posting photos of them at restaurants on social media. During one drop-off, he had the audacity to bring Sophia to my home and asked if she could come inside to get to know Lily better. When I refused, he threatened to take me back to court for parental alienation. Those brief interactions when he picks up or drops off Lily are excruciating. I can see in his eyes that he's not happy, but I can't bring myself to care like I used to. He made his choice. The last straw came when he returned Lily to me with a severe diaper rash that had clearly been untreated for hours. She was crying in pain and her onesie was soaked through. When I confronted him, he claimed it had just happened and accused me of being hysterical. I took photos and documented everything, then took her to the doctor immediately. The pediatrician confirmed the rash had been developing for at least a day and wrote a report stating that neglect had likely contributed to its severity. Jack's response: he accused me of bribing the doctor to write the report. He then demanded that I supply him with the expensive diaper cream the doctor had prescribed, saying it should come out of the child support he paid. Child support that was already 3 months late at that point. When I filed a complaint with the court about the late payments, he had his lawyer send me a threatening letter about my harassment and attempts to alienate him from his daughter. My colleagues at the school have rallied around me, which I'm grateful for. Many of them have cut ties with Jack completely, especially after learning about the stolen money. The school's director even helped me find a smaller, more affordable apartment and arranged for me to teach extra English classes in the evenings to supplement my income. Emily flew in from the States as soon as she could arrange a break from medical school, staying for 3 weeks to help me adjust to single motherhood again. We had long talks late into the night after Lily was asleep. "I should have warned you more clearly," she said one evening. "There was something about him that reminded me of my biological father, something in the way he would charm everyone but then be different when no one was looking." She was right, of course. The patterns had been there all along, but I had been too desperate for happiness to see them clearly. Emily took a semester off from her graduate program to come stay with me and help with her baby sister. That kind of sacrifice makes my heart swell with pride and gratitude. What makes it even more meaningful is that she's doing this despite finding out that I used some of her inheritance from Michael to pay for my wedding to Jack, money that was supposed to be exclusively for her education. "Dad would have wanted us to stick together no matter what," she told me when I finally confessed, though I know she was deeply hurt. She's planning to return to school next term, but she calls every day to check on us. I've even started seeing someone new. It's early days, but he's kind and patient and good with Lily. Carlos is a literature professor at the local university who I met at a book club. Unlike Jack, he doesn't drink, and he's lived in this city his entire life. At 50, he's a few years older than me and divorced with adult children of his own. He takes things slowly, respecting my need to heal and focus on Lily. We mostly just meet for coffee or take walks through the city's parks with Lily in her stroller. He makes me laugh in a way I hadn't in months, and for the first time since Jack left, I'm starting to believe that happiness might be possible again. When I see Jack now, looking miserable and lost, during his increasingly infrequent visits with Lily, a small part of me feels vindicated. The rest of me just feels sad for what could have been. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that things aren't working out with Sophia. Apparently, the fantasy of their relationship hasn't held up to the reality of everyday life. She's 20 years younger than him and wants to travel and build her career, not settle down with a man who's already paying child support for a baby. The engagement seems to be indefinitely extended, with no wedding date in sight. I'm focusing on healing, on being the best mother I can be, and on finding happiness again. Some days are harder than others, but I'm getting there. We built a life together over 4 years, and he dismantled it in months. Now I'm picking up the pieces, one day at a time.